Okay, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. If you can't, please let me know in the little chat box, just in case. All right, we're going to get straight into it because we've got a lot to cover in this hour when we're talking about outdoor playing or weather. So I will just put my screen on to share. Now, if you're comfortable to have your video on, it would be great, only because it makes me feel like I'm actually talking to some humans and not some random squares on the screen. But if you're not, or you're in a place where you can't do that, that's fine too. If you haven't muted yourself, which I think everyone has, if you could do that, that would be great. Just let someone in. And get my screen open for you. All right, now hopefully you should be able to see my screen. If you have any difficulty seeing my screen, please let me know. Just putting that up there. All right. Okay, beautiful. Here we go. So we are talking about outdoor playing or weather this morning, which is nice and fitting. It's getting quite chilly here in Newcastle. I'm not sure about where you are, but it's definitely getting a bit chilly here. So it seems like a great time of year to begin to talk about that. So let me just make sure I can maneuver that. All right, so first off, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I think that the beauty of Zoom is we all get to meet on different lands. For me, here in Newcastle, we are on beautiful Awabakal land. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. All right. So just a couple of quick things. I can just see a message in our little chat box. I'll just double check that just so I can make sure no one's missing anything vital. If I can. Okay, beautiful. All right, I think we're good. Okay, so just a couple of quick things. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the session. You can unmute yourself. I think if you hold down the space bar, you can actually unmute yourself quite easily, and then it mutes you again when you let go. Or you can pop something in the chat box, and it should pop up on my screen so that I can see it and answer or involve your comment or whatever. Just ask that you don't take photos of screenshots of slides with images of children on them. The informational ones, not a problem, but any with photos of children, we just ask not to take those, please. And likewise, just not to share any images online. All right, I'm just going to let someone else in. All right, so a little bit about me. So my name is Nicole. I'm one of the co-founders of Inspire DC. Previously, I have been an educator, nominated supervisor, and I'm currently an approved provider. So we've actually got Inspire DC has family daycare services in 4 states, and we also have an out of school hours service here in Newcastle as well, so I get to be the approved provider for those too. So I'm still very much involved in services, but more recently kind of working in this role doing training, consultancy and supporting services all around Australia, which is lovely. I've got 3 children who are 6, 8 and 11. That's just a little bit about me, nothing overly exciting, but sometimes it's nice to know who you're talking to. All right, so what are we going to cover today? We will move through fairly quickly because we have got a lot of content to cover. So we're going to talk about why outdoor play in all weather can be seen as a challenge, the health development and wellbeing benefits of outdoor play in all weather, learning opportunities, how we overcome educator reluctance and overcoming family reluctance, because they tend to be probably our 2 biggest challenges. And we will get to talking about the challenges as we go. So what is all weather play? So we're going to look at a couple of different weather types. So obviously here in Australia, heat is probably one of our biggest factors when it comes to outdoor play. And I guess we need to kind of be mindful about that when we're talking about playing outdoors in all weather. We're also talking about common sense. So while I'm a massive advocate for getting outside, pull the gumboots on, pop the umbrella up and get out in the rain, I'm also a big believer in keeping children safe. And I know in recent months, I think it was just this previous summer, there was a service who had children go outside onto hot softball. Children ended up with blisters on the bottom of their feet. And so there are a lot of implications with hot weather here in Australia. Depending on where you are, hot weather can be one of those really big challenges. So we need to be mindful about how hot is too hot. When do we draw the line? Now, I guess probably one of the biggest things is a lot of children will know when how hot is too hot as well. Children will often send those cues to us either in their behaviour and in their wanting to stay inside or wanting to do something else, wanting to slow down, but not all children. So that's kind of something we need to be mindful of as well. So rain, we need to talk about whether we might not want to play in the rain. As an adult, you tend to get a bit, you have to dash to the car and it's raining and you're like, oh, I'm going to get wet. Children don't get that for the most part. There will be some that do, but for the most part, children are more than happy to get out in the rain. But again, how much is too much? There comes a point where we go, you know what, maybe we won't be outside in this. We run a Timbernook program here in Newcastle, so it's an outdoor play program. And I think it was our very first school holiday session. So our school holiday program runs from 9 till 3, and there's about 30 children aged sort of 5 to 12. And I think in the very first holiday program, we had rain pretty much all day, and it's a completely 100% outdoor program in the sense that we don't have an indoors at all. So the children get dropped off outside, they get picked up outside, and we spend the entire day outside. We do have an undercover area. We've got some tarps and marquees and things that we can put up, but it's pretty limited. So if we want to play, we need to play outside. And I think probably in the first 10 minutes of being there, I thought, oh my gosh, this is awful. How am I going to survive the day? It's like wet, I had rain dripping down my face. And I thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? And after about that first 10 minutes, you kind of just gave up and went, you know what, we'll go with it. It wasn't cold, so it wasn't unpleasant. It was just wet. And, the children after a while didn't even seem to notice. So we need to think about that when we're talking about rain. What's too much? It's going to look different for everybody, but some of the best experiences I've had outside with children have been in the rain. Snow. So not many of us in Australia are lucky enough to have it. But if we are, what an amazing learning opportunity. And, I think it comes down to being prepared. And we're going to talk about what that looks like towards the end of the session, how we can actually prepare ourselves so that going outside in all weather is actually an easy thing to do rather than a challenge. So wind, we all know, I think, from working with children that wind can make children a little bit crazy. It probably makes adults a little bit crazy too, but it can be a little bit intense sometimes being outside in the wind. The only reason I wouldn't be outside in the wind is if we've got, dangerous trees. We've got hazards that might actually cause some injury to children. General wind is not a problem, and it's actually a beautiful learning opportunity. Cold. So often when we talk about it being cold, it's generally that it's too cold for us as adults than it is for the children. Most of the children are more than happy to go outside when it's cold. The adults tend to be like this and think, oh my gosh, I wish I could be inside. There are going to be times when we go, you know what, it just does feel too cold out here. Maybe it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we're winding down in winter and it's just icy and unpleasant and the children aren't happy and okay, it's too cold, let's go inside. But most of the time when we're talking about it being too cold, it's just that we don't have enough clothing on. It always amazes me, particularly here in Newcastle, being a coastal area. It's not particularly cold. It doesn't get particularly cold, but every winter you will come across people in Newcastle who say, oh, I can't believe it's cold. Oh, it's so cold. But we're not prepared for it. Our houses aren't designed really for the cold. We don't tend to dress particularly well for the cold. And so even though it's not overly cold, we're just not ready for it. I visited Tasmania a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, and I was surprised we were there in the middle of winter, but everywhere felt warm, and it was because the buildings were designed for the cold, but also you were encouraged to wear big jackets everywhere, but there were hooks to hang your jacket. So you could wear a big jacket out for dinner or whatever, and you go into a restaurant and you could hang your jacket up. And so it was that preparedness, which I think is what we lack for the most part. Lightning, oh, the little quote didn't change there, but that's kind of my, we're not outside. You know, it's like, it's all good to say we're outside in all weather, but lightning's kind of one of those limits. We don't really want to be outside the storm. All right, so what are the biggest barriers to playing outdoors in all weather? I'm just going to trial something. I've just popped up a poll. So you should get it hopefully in your chat box. I haven't done it like this before, so we'll just see if it works. Sometimes it's nice to test something out. But it's just, what are the biggest barriers to outdoor play in all weather? So it's just asking you to choose what you think the biggest barrier is, and that might be just for you, what you're experiencing in your service. It might be what you perceive to be the biggest barriers overall in early childhood. But if you can pop a response in there, it would just be interesting to see what people are facing in terms of their barriers to outdoor play. And so we've got some responses coming in, predominantly educator attitudes and family attitudes are what are taking over. Definitely family attitudes. So we've got more than half of the group have said that family attitudes are the biggest barrier, which probably doesn't come as much of a surprise. It also doesn't come as much of a surprise that reluctance from children is not up there at all, because children generally aren't real reluctant to being outside. So definitely educator attitudes and family attitudes. All right, so with that in mind, we have a look at the challenges. So we'll start with families. And I guess I want to preface it with saying that while it can be frustrating to have those challenges from families, particularly I've been there, I've had the family who comes in and says, I don't want my child to go outside today. It's too cold and they've been sick, and they'll just get sick again. And it's frustrating as an educator. But I guess when I take my educator hat off and put my parent hat on, it reminds me that typically parents want what's best for their child. They don't generally set out to make our day difficult and to make what we do difficult. They just want what's best for their child. And so for them, they want their child to be healthy. Most people, I think, are still, in a general population kind of sense, are still of the opinion that being wet, being cold will make us sick. And I'm going to show you some little bits of research shortly that will help us to kind of refute that with families, because it's not the case. We don't get sick from being cold. We don't get sick from being wet. We get sick from germs. And we've all seen that with the last 12 months. Germs are not our friend. They are at times, but germs are not typically our friend. That's what makes us sick. So we're not getting sick when we're going outside in winter. But that is a concern for families. And I guess it's that having those conversations with families, providing them with information, and we're going to talk at the end about the things that we can do in terms of advocacy and kind of informing families and informing educators about the value of outdoor play, and also giving them some of the facts around things like illness. My response typically to families is, if your child is too sick to be outside, your child is too sick to be here, because we are going outside. But, you know, again, I can understand that. It's just coming from a good place for families, but it's a challenge for us. Probably one of the other challenges for families is washing. You know, families think, oh man, if they go outside and they're playing in the mud and whatever, that's extra washing that I have to do. And look, as a mum of three, I can completely relate to that. It's frustrating. But again, it's just talking to families about what they're providing for children, looking at things like rain suits and splash suits and protective kind of gear that children can actually just get wet and take off, or big jackets that they can take off after they've been outdoors. Then we've got our educators. So quite a few people said in the poll that some of the challenge comes from educators. And I guess a lot of that is around personal preference. I don't want to be cold. And that's often what it is. I've worked with many educators over the years who said, I just don't want to go outside. It's too cold. I don't want to be outside in the cold. So my former service, we used to joke that it was kind of the coldest place in Newcastle. And it wouldn't have been, but it felt like it, particularly in the mornings in winter. You'd go outside at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it felt like it was about 10 degrees colder than anywhere else. But we kind of got used to it as a team and realised, you know what, we're going to be outside with the children. We need big jackets, we need beanies, we need gloves, we need, an extra jacket. I had one educator who used to wear 3 jumpers and a jacket just to be outdoors. But, that was part of what our philosophy was outdoor play. So you kind of had to overcome that personal preference, while you might like to be inside where it's toasty warm and everyone's got the air conditioner, cranked up to 30 and, we're all breathing in each other's heat. There's kind of a need to be outside. So sometimes we need to be able to put that personal preference aside. Another reason we can have kind of resistance from educators is around that cleanup and follow-up. So particularly if we're looking at going outside in the rain, maybe that means that we have to get children into rain jackets and out of wet clothes. And, it can be a bit of a production line. We're trying to get children out of wet, muddy, clothes and shoes and socks. And, we're kind of dealing with all of that stuff. And I think there can be some reluctance there. But when we can sort of look past that and actually just build that into it, we used to factor that in. What? We know that it takes us longer when we're transitioning back into inside after a wet day. So we give ourselves an extra 10 minutes before lunch so that it's a lot calmer. We have, things set up. We get the children's bags lined up. We have a process in place so that it makes that, so much smoother. Our environment, as I said, can also be a challenge. It might be access to equipment or spaces or resources or whatever, can make it difficult depending on the layout of your physical environment. It can be harder in some weather to be outside. Potentially if you don't have enough shade, it can be too hot in summer. You got lots of big trees, might be dangerous in the wind, all those sorts of things. So your environment can pose a challenge. And then we've got our routines and practices. So we might be looking at things around like the structure of our day. So maybe it's that, around the time that meals are served, or that transition times, or the times children arrive and leave, or whatever. But also expectations around the program that might come from management, might come from families or whatever. So there's some of the challenges that we can face. So what are the benefits? These are some of those things that you can share with families in particular. So like this one says, playing outside allows your child an escape from indoor germs and bacteria. And I find that actually really quite interesting because with COVID in particular, I know there's been a little bit of talk about, us stepping into winter and it becoming a higher risk time because we tend to gather inside with the heaters on and we're all in close quarters, and that tends to be when people get sick with colds, flus, etc. It's not just that the germ's more prevalent at this time of year, but it's that we tend to be inside and act as an incubator for germs. And that is actually why childcare services tend to get a bad rap as germ farms, because ask anyone whose child has started at childcare for the first time and how many times they got sick, and most of you probably know as educators you tend to get sick as well. So that tends to be because we're bundled up inside. So this particular information said it will not only be good for the healthy bunch, the sick kids benefit from the fresh air as well. Just make sure they are properly bundled up and moving around to capture and generate warmth. Being outside more often also allows your child to develop a stronger autoimmune system and a resistance to allergies. Studies have shown that children in rural areas or those who are active outside have the best overall health. And then this one's quite simple, from Angela Hanscom. So she's the author of Balanced and Barefoot. It says exposure to dirt, animals and germs from an early age on can actually improve the immune system. This one says that colder weather brings lots of different and fresh challenges for kids and offers new ways of learning outdoors. Children are encouraged to assess risks such as slippery surfaces caused by the rain and frost. They can then adapt their play to ensure safety. It also helps children to acquire new problem-solving skills and promotes cognitive thinking. So that's just a different angle. During the winter, we have a small window of opportunity to be exposed to sunlight and increase our vitamin D levels. Research shows that exposure to sunlight provides essential vitamin D, which regulates mental and emotional moods, increases energy and sharpens memory. In as little as 15 minutes of playing outside, children can get their daily dosage of vitamin D. Now, in Australia, we don't typically have a vitamin D deficiency because we're a particularly sunny place, but you will find, I know there has been an increase in the last probably 10 years of vitamin D deficiencies in children, and it's predominantly because we have become so sun safe, which we obviously need to do. We want to be sun safe, but because of that, there is a risk of becoming a bit deficient in vitamin D. So being outdoors in winter, getting plenty of sunlight in winter is a really great way to boost that vitamin D. All right, so learning opportunities. Think, if I'm correct, we've got a video that I want to play for you. Hopefully this will cooperate. Okay. So how did that video make you feel? What did you notice about the video? You're welcome to unmute or just pop something in the chat box. What sort of things did you notice about how they prepared to go outside, how they interacted outside, even what they were wearing? The children looked happy. I think the big thing for me is the children are definitely prepared for that weather, as are the educators. Everybody's prepared for that. They've got the clothing that means that they can actually be out there and be fully immersed in it. This comment in the chat box is that the children and educators were so engaged in outdoor play. The children were so excited and happy as they had explored their environment. Absolutely. And I think the big thing, and I'm well aware that we're seeing a video that's taken for that purpose. They're dressed appropriately. But yeah, I think we're seeing a video taken for that purpose. But you don't see the educators kind of just standing off to the side, freezing and thinking, oh my gosh, I wish we were inside, and looking at their watch and, dreading being out there. They were actually a big part of that. Someone else has said in the chat box too, it gave them the opportunities for learning. Absolutely. So I think seeing the potential in the outdoors and what it can offer children and what it can offer educators, I think too, regardless of the weather, is kind of so valuable. All right, so with that in mind, I've just covered off a couple of different weather types. So if we've got our sunny and warm weather, some opportunities we might have for learning might be shadow play. We're out in the sun, we actually get some really interesting shadow depending on where we are, and children can play around with that, with materials, with the physical environment. We can actually talk about the temperature. Children can have opportunities to look at that, and actually feel that and understand that in a real context. So some of those sort of scientific explorations, maybe around melting, what happens if we take out a block of ice and put it outside today? What would happen? Would it melt? Would it not melt? How long would it take to melt? There's all those sorts of opportunities that can come about from being outside in warm weather. Now, obviously, when we're outside in warm weather, we tend to just be a little bit more content in general anyway. So that's I think there are some opportunities there for some scientific kind of play as well. Rain, we might do things like measuring puddles. We might actually learn about the weather. Maybe we set up a rain gauge and actually, take note of, the amount of rain that we're having. We might, notice changes in textures and smells. When it does rain, things can change. The ground gets slipperier, or it smells different. The grass smells different, or a certain tree might smell different, or, we can watch how the raindrops affect, animals outside. What happens to the birds when it starts to rain? Do they play out in the rain? Do they go inside? There's lots of that kind of wondering, I suppose, with children. One of my favourite things to do with a group of children was we had a clear tunnel, one of those big, large kind of expandable tunnels, but it was a clear one, and we actually ran it from our veranda out into the playground, and the children could go out and they laid under the rain and kind of watched the rain. And but there's also plenty of opportunities for just being out and doing what you normally do, but just doing it in the rain, and that just involves that being prepared. Some children will quite happily, and depending on the time of the year, if it's summer, most people don't really care about being outside in the rain in whatever they're wearing anyway. But as the weather gets cooler, we might want to kind of invest in some other resources that can help us be outside in the rain. So the cold or the snow, we might have discussions about weather. We might have observations about, how your body responds to the cold. How does your body feel when you're outside when it's cold? Most children love being able to spot snow breath and, make snow breath. Why does that happen? Having some of those conversations around things like that. And then wind, so we might be looking at, how wind works, and we might have things like kites or wind socks, or, even just pieces of fabric or anything like that. We can also experiment with sound. You know, our voice travels differently when it's windy, and so maybe we can experiment with some sound outside. So there's lots of different things that we can do outside in different weather. All right, so some practical strategies for outdoor play. So this is one of those kind of classic quotes: there is no such thing as bad weather, only inappropriate clothing. I think a big thing about the weather and how we see the weather and how we convey that to children is also around the language that we use with weather. If we say it's a yucky, horrible day outside, you know, it's a yucky, horrible, rainy day, that gives rain that negative connotation, whereas we could actually turn around and go, oh, it's amazing, the rain's, you know, really coming down, this is going to be so great for our veggie garden, or, you know, whatever that is. So changing that language around that. But yeah, I love this because we can actually prepare for it with appropriate clothing. So some simple things that we can do might be to have spare gumboots on hand. My former service actually has an entire shelf set up outside with a whole bunch of gumboots that they've sourced from op shops and donated, had families donate and whatever. So there's just a bunch of gumboots. So children, if they don't bring their own, can actually go and get some. But they also encourage children, you know, to wear the gumboots. Then we might also have spare rain gear on hand. So we might have some spare umbrellas for children who want to go outside in the rain, might have a variety of umbrellas or rain suits. I know there's a few different ones you can get. Some of them can be quite pricey, so it's just looking at what you actually need. Encouraging families to come prepared. So again, this is about your conversations with families. You know, how do we have those conversations where, you know what, we will actually be outside in the rain, or we will be outside in the cold, or we will be outside in the snow if we're lucky enough to have it, or whatever. So talking to families about how they can come prepared. And so that might mean that we put something in our family information book. It might mean that we put regular things in our parent newsletters or on our social media, or however we communicate with our families regularly. We might have like a checklist that we make for families so that they can actually remember what to pack, so that their child is prepared for all sorts of weather. But the main things would be, you know, spare clothes, including spare socks. You know, the number of children that come and they don't have spare socks, and then they go outside in the rain and all of a sudden they've got wet feet and, you know, they don't have anything warm to put on. So, you know, really informing families and making sure that they're coming prepared. And depending on the age of the children, you know, having the children responsible for some of that too. Encouraging your educators to come prepared. So as I said before, you know, when it's a challenge for educators to be outside, we want to then empower educators to take on that challenge and come prepared. You know, bring an extra jacket, keep a jacket at the service. Maybe it's that if you have a uniform, a service uniform, maybe it includes a jacket. You know, the number of services that I go to where the uniform is a shirt, that's great. That's great in summer, but then come winter, we actually need a decent jacket. Maybe that's part of the uniform for your service. Same again with things like beanies and, you know, gloves and whatever you need to be prepared. But again, putting that in your staff handbooks, in, you know, whatever channels you use to communicate with your team, are really important. I actually purchased probably about 2 years ago a pair of boots. I should have had them on hand so I can show you. They're looking a bit rough now, but they are gum boots that are actually proper shoes. So they're well lined. They're lined with like a wetsuit material, so they're completely waterproof, but they've got decent tread for being outside, and they're, unlike gum boots, they're actually comfortable. I could wear them all day and not even feel them. And for me, they were a bit of, you know, an investment. They're about $140, but I think when I wore them nearly every day in winter last year, and every time that it rains, I put them on. And I think every time I wear them somewhere, someone says, oh my gosh, I need a pair of those. So that might be something that's, you know, valuable for your educators. So I'm happy to kind of share a link with you. If you want more information about that, let me know. But they, yeah, been a game changer in terms of being outside, because I no longer had to worry about having wet feet. Dress warmly, so encouraging children, families, to, you know, come prepared, come dressed warm, same with adults. And again, check our own attitudes about the weather. So, you know, that kind of, it's a yucky rainy day, turning it around into actually it's amazing, you know, look at what we can do, look at the things we can see that we wouldn't be able to see if it wasn't raining. All right, so advocacy and education. So for families, we're going to put some information in our handbooks. So we want to make sure that when families first arrive at our service, so even from the get-go, you know, if we're promoting our service online, if we've got a website or if we've got a Facebook page or however it is that we're getting the information out to families, if being outside in all weather is something that we value, then let's convey that in that messaging. Maybe that means that we've got photos of children outside in the mud. Maybe it means that we've got, you know, information in that about why we do those sorts of things, but really conveying that message from the start. And I think too, when whether it's you that's responsible for that or, you know, it's something that a nominated supervisor does or whoever, when we have our first kind of meet and greets with families, to be really upfront about that. We play outside in all weather, and this is why, and this is what we do, and this is how we come prepared, and these are the things you need to know. So being really upfront from the beginning so that, you know, when a family starts in summer, and everything's fine and their child's outside and then winter arrives and they say, oh, actually, I don't want them to play outside. They'll get cold, they'll get sick. We've already had that conversation. We've started to build that. We might, as I said, put information on our website, lots of conversations with families. You know, again, those sorts of things are going to take time. You know, for families, it's about they're used to certain things, they're used to a certain way of being, of doing, of wanting the best for their child. And so sometimes when we say, actually, we're going to go outside in the rain, your child's not going to get sick, that can be a challenge. They're not going to take that on straight away. So conversations over time, really building those relationships. We might put little snippets in our newsletters, so it might be little pieces of research, particularly as we're coming into the months when children start to get sick. And it might be things, you know, might just put like a little fact or you know, a myth and the fact, you know, my child will get sick if they play outside in the cold or whatever, and then, you know, actually no, this is why. Or it might just be, you know, 3 simple ways you can keep your child warm at the service or whatever. And it might be that you put an extra layer on underneath, that they bring a big jacket, that they bring a beanie, or, you know, whatever. Documentation. So documentation of children's learning can be a really valuable way to advocate for being outside all the time. So when I know I was at a service a few weeks ago and the educational leader said to me, we don't seem to have a lot of documentation of things happening outdoors. She said, I feel like the educators are stuck in a belief that the real learning's happening inside and outside's just the place to let off steam and kind of burn up the energy and whatever. So I think it's shifting that narrative a little bit, and we can do that through our documentation. So some of those amazing things that do happen outside when we're, you know, checking the rain gauge and splashing in the puddles or whatever, we can document those for families so that they can actually see the value in what we're doing. We might have a parent information night. So, you know, we do parent information nights for all sorts of things. It might be for, you know, transitioning to school, or it might be around toilet training or behaviour or whatever. Or maybe we also have one about the benefits of outdoor play, or talking about how to keep your child well in winter or whatever. So it might be, and I think now that we're kind of as a society a lot more comfortable with Zoom, you could do that online, because I know how difficult it can be to get families into the service after hours, and that's typically because they've got young children at home and they've been at work and all those sorts of things, and unpacking their concerns. So for those families who are finding it a real challenge, actually sitting down and having a conversation with them about what those concerns might be. You know, it's that my child will get sick, great, let's talk about that, why that will or won't happen or whatever. So actually doing that with the family. And for our educators, it might be information in handbooks, as I said before, you know, really building that up in them. Lots of conversations as a team, you know, being able to challenge one another, you know, We're all going to have days where we think, oh my gosh, I just really don't want to go outside. I'm just not feeling it or whatever. But in general, we should be able to kind of put those things aside and, do what we need to do for children. But being able to challenge one another from a professional sort of standpoint is important. Professional development, so we might have, for those educators who are really struggling, we might have sessions like this one, or we might send them off to something to learn about the benefits of outdoor play, whatever that might be, whatever their barrier is. As I said before, including a jacket in the uniform. If you're in a place that's particularly cold, if you're down in Tasmania, it's cold more than it's not cold, then maybe you include a beanie in your uniform if that's what you're going to have. And if that makes it, more accessible to your educators, why not? And again, unpack their worries, actually talk to them about what their challenges are, why they don't want to be outside, and, don't just fob it off, but have a conversation about that. All right, so this is something for you to do. You can do that now, you can do it after the session, but I think the challenge with most professional development is we can listen and take in little bits, and then we go away and we go back to our day-to-day work, and it's hard sometimes to implement that. So I think I'm just kind of going to set you a challenge, and it's listing 3 things you could do to advocate for all-weather play in your service. So just come up with 3 things that you could do, and after the session, do one of them. Just do one thing, and that might be that you have a conversation with a family about, being outside in all-weather. You challenge an educator that you work with who, has the grumpies and doesn't want to go outside because it's too cold, or whatever. Whatever you need to do one of those things. All right, we actually wrapped that up pretty well, I think, because you're a fairly quiet bunch. But now is a good opportunity, if you have got questions, to ask those. As I say, you can use the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask questions. But I guess the key thing is to remember that play is about the child, it's not about us. And while we're out there supporting them and we're facilitating their play and we're setting up the environments and we're doing all of those things, it's not actually about us. So we need to sometimes just suck it up, put an extra jacket on and get outside. I think one of the big challenges too is, I often hear educators say, oh, it's so stressful inside when it's a rainy day. Oh, there's nothing worse than a rainy day and we're stuck inside. Why do we need to be? Why do we need to be stuck inside? That's often something that we're putting on ourselves, but then we're kind of, frustrated with that afterwards. We say rainy days are stressful inside, then let's not stay inside just because it's raining. Let's get outside. There's something in the chat box. This is a good one. How to have discussions with parents who don't like water play if it's cold. So water play is such a challenge for some families, particularly in the cold weather. And look, even as a parent, there have been times when I say to my own children, I'm like, oh man, are you really sure you want to be outside, like playing in the water? We've got a rainwater tank, and my 2 girls will play in that for hours on end. And they were outside over the course of this weekend in the tutu playing with water. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's like 15 degrees. This is crazy. Why are you doing that? But I guess it's having a little trust in children that they actually will know when they're too cold. 9 times out of 10, children will know when they're too cold. And that's a hard thing, I think, for some families to kind of realise. And so, again, it's just coming back to those really basic things. What are your concerns? Why don't you think they should be playing with water? Usually it's they'll get sick. Okay, that's not true. And that's when we start to give them some of that information that says, you know what, it's not true. Children don't get sick from being cold. They don't get sick from being wet. They get sick from germs. So if we're stuck inside with the heater on, and that's when they get sick. If the concern is they're going to be in wet clothes, great, I get that. We don't want them in wet clothes. So we provide, some rain suits or whatever, if that's, a big issue. Great, send them in something that, a weatherproof jacket, or, we just need to have those conversations about what is your actual concern, because generally it's, they can't play in water, it's too cold. Why? Why is it too cold? What are you worried about? And I think when faced with it, most families, when you can sort of say, think about your own childhood and the stuff that you love to do, that's what we want for children. We want children to be outside and, being creative and playing and whatever. And that sometimes involves getting wet. Now, I guess where it can be a challenge is I know I have been in services before where families have arrived to pick up their child and their child is like soaking wet and cold, and the water play is long over, but the child's still wet and in wet clothes and I think that's where us as educators need to step in sometimes and go, okay, we're having water play until this time, and then once that's over, then we change into warmer clothes and we're done with water play. We used to have a cut-off. I think our water play used to cut off at 2:30 in the afternoon because most of the families started arriving around 3, and it gave us time then for children to be back into warmer clothes. They were kind of warm and comfortable again before their families arrived, because I think as a parent, that was always my frustrating thing. I'd get, if I got to the service to pick up my child and they were soaking wet and then I had to change them before we left and all those sorts of things, I think that can add to that frustration. So I guess to answer the question, the big thing would be talking to the family about what their actual concern is. Is it that their child's going to get sick? Is it that they go through 10 sets of clothes and the parents got to wash them all? Is it that, what is it? And then start to unpack that with them. So someone's asked, do we have any particular articles or research that we can share with families? Absolutely. So I'll send you through some links. I'll send out an email with some links to things, even some of those little snippets of research that I shared before, that can kind of get you started in the right direction. Just being able to share some of those real basics with families. We're also working on a resource at the moment, which hopefully we'll have up on our website shortly, which would help services to be able to communicate that sort of stuff to families too. So hopefully that will help. So I guess the key things to kind of remember is that outdoor play provides amazing opportunities all year round. There's enough that we can do outside. There's nothing we can't do outside. We can learn it all just by being outside. And I know I've experienced that with our Timbernook program because it's purely outside. I see what the opportunities are that are available to children. And if we want to make change, then we actually need to make change. We need to do things, and that might mean that we invest in some equipment. So we get some extra gum boots, or we get some umbrellas, or we get some hooks to hang up wet jackets outside, or, we actually make some changes that enable it to be a better process. And that's, I think, a large part of it, particularly for educators, where the challenge comes in for educators, is that we don't have processes in place that make it simple for us to go and play outside in the rain, or to, get out in the snow, as I say, if we're lucky enough to get it, actually to get out there and do it. I guess I'll just finish off with one little thing, which I always find funny. So Claire Warden, who's from Scotland, and many of you might know, quite involved in the forest kindergarten movement. And I can remember Claire coming to an event of ours a few years ago, and an educator said something about it being too cold outside. And Claire said, "It is never too cold in Australia." She said, "I've been here many times now. It's never too cold in Australia because it's nowhere near as cold as Scotland." But she said, if we waited in Scotland for it to be not raining and not cold, we just wouldn't go outside. So, she said, you're really lucky here to have the weather that you have and actually be able to get outside with children pretty much all year round. And there was a question there about having a risk assessment for rain play. I haven't done one personally, but I think it'd be quite simple to do. It's really just about looking at, when we talk about risk assessment, we also talk about benefit risk assessment. So on our website, in our online store, we've got a benefit risk assessment template, and it essentially walks you through that process of looking at the benefits of the activity, whatever that happens to be. And so in this case, we'll be looking at the benefits of rain play. And so we might be talking about, the learning opportunities that are available to children, the health benefits of being outside, in all weather, all those sorts of benefits. Then we'd also look at the risk. What are the risks? The risk might be that they could slip over on, a certain part of the playground or whatever. and then what things are we going to put in place to prevent that from happening. And maybe that means that if we're outside when it's raining, we're only in this particular area, or we're not using this particular piece of equipment, or, it's looking at those particular challenges and actually limiting those. So I think that'd be where I would start in terms of a benefit risk assessment, just really looking at what are we hoping to achieve out of it, what are the particular challenges and how do we overcome those, and really making children a part of that process, so that children are actually involved in that and have the opportunity to contribute to that. Because some of those things that we might then add as like control measures might be that we have gumboots available, and we have raincoats available, and we have these things available, and we use, as I say, don't use this particular equipment or do use this particular one. So that would be where I would start in terms of a benefit risk assessment for rain play. All right. Are there any other questions? Anything else that you wanted covered? I think we've done pretty well. So hopefully you can take away some little bits that you can use within your service, whether it's some changes that you're going to make in terms of resources or equipment, or in terms of your processes and your routines and how you actually implement this sort of play. Maybe it's taking away some confidence to challenge a colleague who's cold and doesn't want to go outside, or maybe it's something that you can implement in terms of advocating for outdoor play for families. But hopefully you can take something with you today. And as I said, your challenge is to come up with 3 ways you can advocate for outdoor play in all weather and try and implement at least one of them. Now you will get an email from us in the next day or two, which will have some links and further information. And if you've got any questions after that, you're more than welcome to send me an email or get in touch through our website or our social media. Other than that, I will leave you to your Monday. You can get back to play with children, hopefully outside. So enjoy. Thank you. As I say, if you've got any questions, get in touch. Otherwise, goodbye.